The first step a millionaire's autistic son took wasn't toward him, but toward the nanny. Ethan Callahan had everything the world admired: a thriving career, a top-tier tech company he built from the ground up, and enough wealth to never worry about material needs again. But behind the doors of his sleek modern home lived a man quietly unraveling, not from failure, but from loss. His wife, Anna, had passed away suddenly 2 years earlier after a long illness. She left him with their son, Noah, only 2 years old at the time, with a diagnosis that shattered what was left of Ethan's world: autism. The boy didn't respond, didn't speak, didn't meet anyone's eyes. Ethan, a man who had always solved problems with logic and control, now found himself powerless. By day, he ran his company like a machine: cold, precise, efficient. By night, he returned to a home that felt more like a museum: silent, echoing, filled only with the soft footsteps of staff moving carefully through the halls. Noah didn't cry, didn't laugh. His gaze was always fixed somewhere Ethan couldn't follow. He tried everything: doctors, therapists, specialists. But no one could unlock the boy. No one could replace Anna, the woman who used to cradle Noah every night and whisper that everything would be okay. Ethan hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the ability to connect with his only son. And then, one day, something began to shift. Not because of a renowned expert or cutting-edge therapy, but because of a woman he had never placed any hope in. A woman hired simply to mop the floors. Since Anna passed away, Ethan had hired 7 different nannies. Not one lasted more than 3 months. Each arrived with an impressive resume: degrees in psychology, training in behavioral therapy, even experience at specialized autism centers. But one by one, they left. Some discouraged, some in tears, and some refusing to return after a single, emotionally draining evening. Ethan didn't blame them, but he didn't forgive them either. He dismissed every one of them with cold efficiency. To him, if they couldn't connect with Noah, they had no place in his home. And each time the front door closed behind yet another failed attempt, Ethan found himself right back at the beginning: just him, Noah, and the impossible silence that stood between them. Noah wasn't difficult. He didn't scream or throw tantrums. But his silence, unyielding, heavy, and impenetrable, was what drained people most, like speaking into a void that never answered back. Ethan grew more impatient with each passing month. He began enforcing routines: strict schedules, meticulously balanced meals, mandatory speech therapy. He believed structure would save his son. But the tighter he gripped, the further Noah withdrew into the invisible world he seemed to prefer, a world Ethan had no map for. Then Grace Turner arrived. No fancy qualifications, no promises. Just a quiet woman who submitted an application for housekeeping. Ethan hired her almost thoughtlessly. He needed someone to clean, not someone to hope for. She entered the house like a soft breeze, shifting nothing, asking for nothing. She didn't inquire about Noah or request guidance. She simply did her work, mopping floors, folding towels, picking up scattered toys. Ethan barely noticed her. He didn't expect anything. And yet, she became the first person who didn't retreat in the face of his son's silence. Grace Turner didn't bring much with her when she walked into the Callahan house: a small backpack, a few neatly folded clothes, and a presence so unremarkable most people wouldn't remember meeting her. She didn't try to impress, didn't go out of her way to please. She simply showed up, on time, hardworking, quiet. Ethan barely noticed. To him, Grace was a temporary replacement, a name on a schedule he barely glanced at. She didn't ask about Noah. She didn't request instructions or make small talk about the revolving door of nannies before her. She arrived each morning, cleaned the kitchen, dusted the stairs, changed the sheets, and quietly left when her shift was done. What set Grace apart was this: she wasn't afraid of silence. She didn't try to talk to Noah like the others. She didn't attempt a new method or force engagement strategies. She simply watched. Once, when she saw Noah sitting under the table, staring at the reflection of light on the floor, she didn't call him out. She sat on the opposite side of the room, cleaning gently, keeping just enough distance. Sometimes she hummed, not to draw attention, but as a quiet rhythm of her day. Another time, when Noah flung a wet cloth to the ground, Grace didn't flinch or scold. She picked it up, wrung it out, and placed it back where it belonged, as if they were actors in a play whose lines they both understood but never needed to say aloud. Little by little, her presence became part of Noah's space. That day wasn't special. Not a birthday, not a holiday. Just an ordinary afternoon with soft light pouring through the living room windows, casting a golden hue across the carpet. Grace was cleaning up Noah's toys, wooden blocks and puzzle pieces he often arranged in quiet, linear patterns. Noah sat nearby, not watching, leaning against the couch, eyes lost in that distant place he often visited. Grace stood, ready to leave the room, when she paused. Something felt different. Noah was shifting his weight, his small hands pressing into the floor, his head tilting as if he were calculating something. Grace lowered herself to the carpet again, keeping a respectful distance, a slow breath. Then, with uncertain resolve, Noah pushed up onto his knees, then onto his feet. Grace didn't speak loudly. She didn't cheer. She simply knelt, gently opening her arms, not to demand, but to offer. "Noah," she said softly, like a breeze passing through the room, "you can do it." No one in that moment expected what would happen next. But Noah lifted his foot, wobbly, shaky, then stepped. One trembling foot forward, then another, and another. His arms stretched out in front of him toward Grace as if something in her presence was calling him forward. She didn't move, didn't rush to meet him. Just smiled, eyes glassy, her voice a quiet thread. "That's right, you're doing it." And then, as if the world had been holding its breath, Noah fell, not down, but into her arms, not collapsing, but surrendering. Ethan walked through the front door at that exact moment. He froze in place, his briefcase nearly slipping from his hand. In the living room, usually still, sterile, his son was in the arms of a woman he barely knew, not screaming, not panicking, just there. No one spoke. Grace looked at Ethan, no apology in her eyes, no defense, just the gaze of someone who had witnessed something sacred and knew not everyone would be ready for it. Ethan didn't approach, didn't retreat. He stood, chest tight, unsure what to feel. Part of him wanted to yell, "What do you think you're doing?" Another part wanted to fall to his knees and weep, because for the first time, Noah had walked, not on command, not in therapy, not in fear, but because someone was waiting for him at the other end. That moment, Noah stepping into Grace's arms, kept replaying in Ethan's mind all evening. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on the reports piling on his desk. In his head, those small, wobbly feet still moved across the carpet. That tiny hand reached out toward a stranger, and Grace's voice echoed from somewhere distant. "You can do it?" No one had ever said that to Noah. Ethan certainly hadn't. He told himself that Grace had crossed a line, that she had no right to do what she did. She was hired to clean, not to train his son. But no matter how many times he repeated it, the image wouldn't leave his mind. He wanted to believe it was a fluke, that anyone could have gotten Noah to walk, given the right moment. But he knew that wasn't true, because Ethan had been there for 2 years, and never, not once, had he seen his son willingly move toward anyone. There was something about the way Grace simply existed, no pressure, no expectations, that had opened a door Ethan hadn't even known was there. And that, more than anything, was what hurt. Not because Grace was wrong, but because she had done what he couldn't. He was angry. But he didn't know at whom. At Grace for daring to try? At himself for never being able to? That night, as he entered the living room and saw Grace folding Noah's tiny towels, Ethan paused. She didn't look up. He didn't speak. Silence, but not the usual kind. Not cold, just strained. Finally, he spoke, his voice dry, like he had to drag the words from somewhere deep. "I didn't hire you to do that?" Grace looked up, not defensive. She simply nodded. "I know," she said softly. "I just couldn't ignore it when I saw him trying." Not an apology, not a challenge, just the truth. And that truth, light as it was, struck Ethan in a place he didn't know how to name. He turned and walked away. But something inside him had started to crack. Every night, when the house grew quiet and Ethan retreated to his study, Noah grew restless, crying and kicking in his crib, refusing to calm down. Grace couldn't ignore it. Even though she no longer intended to stay, she still felt responsible for the little boy. One night, almost instinctively, she picked him up, sat down in the rocking chair, and began humming a simple childhood tune. The gentle sound repeated the same motif. To her surprise, Noah's breathing slowed, and his small body gradually relaxed in her arms. It was the first time she had seen him calm down so quickly. From that night on, Grace repeated the routine. After finishing the housework, she waited for Noah to become restless. Then she would gently lift him up, humming the same soothing melody. She didn't sing the words, only a steady breath, as if her voice alone was enough to comfort him. Noah began responding almost immediately. His eyes blinked slowly, his little fists opened as he listened. Within minutes, he relaxed against her chest and drifted into sleep. For Grace, it became a moment of peaceful connection, helping her forget the burdens of the household for a while. She didn't think anyone would notice, but she didn't know that Ethan had begun pausing outside the nursery door. The first time he heard the melody, he stopped only out of curiosity. He had never heard Grace sing and wondered why she was in Noah's room for so long. But when he leaned slightly against the doorway, something unexpected struck him. The soothing sound filled the hallway in a way the house had been missing for months. He stayed longer than he intended, quietly listening as Grace's voice lulled Noah to sleep. Ethan told himself it was just coincidence, but the following night he returned to the same spot outside the door. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening to the steady melody. The sound wasn't professional or trained, but it carried a warmth that unsettled him. From inside the room, he heard Noah's cries fade, replaced by peaceful breathing. For a man used to controlling everything with strict rules and money, such a simple act was almost unbelievable. He remembered countless nights when Noah refused to settle, even after he had called nannies, doctors, and even specialists to explain why his son couldn't sleep peacefully. No advice had ever worked. And yet here was Grace, the woman he had almost dismissed, soothing the boy with nothing more than a lullaby. Ethan didn't step inside. He stood at the door, careful not to reveal his presence, but he couldn't deny the impact of that ritual on him. The emptiness in the house, haunting him since his wife's death, suddenly shifted when Grace sang. He still resisted the thought, but part of him knew he had begun to look forward to those minutes every night. Grace had no idea Ethan was silently there. To her, she was simply doing what felt right for Noah. She didn't see it as anything extraordinary. It was a lullaby she remembered from her own family, a tune her mother had sung to her as a child. She had no idea it was affecting both Noah and Ethan so deeply. Each night, she entered the nursery with the same quiet determination. No matter how tiring the day had been, she cradled Noah, rocking gently in the chair, repeating the melody until his eyelids grew heavy. She noticed small changes. He rested his head on her shoulder more easily, no longer resisted sleep, and the tension in his little body slowly disappeared. To her, it was a sign of trust, a proof that even though she was preparing to leave, she had made a small difference. In those quiet minutes, she almost forgot her decision to go. The room felt different, warmer, filled with something fragile, yet real. She thought it was a moment shared only between her and Noah, unaware that someone else was also there, just outside the door. Meanwhile, Ethan carried his own conflict. Each time he heard the lullaby, emotions he had buried resurfaced. The sound reminded him of his late wife. Though Grace's voice was different, not the same at all, it filled a similar void. The house had been silent for too long, filled only with Noah's cries and his own stern commands. The gentle melody pierced that silence, replacing it with something more tender. Ethan found himself lingering at the door longer each night, sometimes leaning against the frame, sometimes closing his eyes as if letting the sound sink deeper. He never admitted it, but he needed those moments almost as much as Noah did. They gave him back something he had lost, the sense that a home was not only a place of grief and control, but also a place where comfort could still exist. Though he kept his coldness during the day, at night he became the silent witness of that tender ritual. He began to wonder what would happen when she left, and whether the silence would return, harsher than before. Days went by, the routine continued. Grace sang, Noah relaxed, and Ethan listened. Every night was the same. Yet for Ethan, each time carried a new weight. He never spoke to anyone about standing at the nursery door. He didn't want Grace to know he was there, nor did he want to face the weakness of admitting he depended on those moments. Still, he couldn't stop himself from returning. It was as if the melody filled not only the nursery, but also the emptiness in his own life. For the first time in months, he felt the crushing silence of the house ease. He still intended to let Grace go, believing it was the right thing, but deep down, he feared losing the sound that had accompanied his nights. And so, unintentionally, Ethan also became part of the nightly ritual. Grace sang, Noah found peace, and he stood quietly at the door, absorbing a melody that had breathed life back into a house long overshadowed by loss. The storm began late at night, rattling the windows with heavy rain and thunder. Ethan was in his study, pretending to read documents, though his focus drifted to the sound of the storm outside. Noah had already grown restless in his room, and Grace moved quietly down the hallway, checking everything. Then, without warning, the power went out. The house, once filled with light, was swallowed by darkness. Ethan froze. His heart clenched as Noah's cries tore through the silence. The crying grew louder, full of fear, as the boy struggled to make sense of the sudden change around him. Ethan ran to the nursery, but froze at the door. Noah trembled, screaming, clutching the crib rails, while Ethan's feet felt nailed to the floor. Every cry from his son was a reminder. He was failing him again. Ethan wanted to do something, to comfort his son, but his body felt paralyzed. Every imagined effort collapsed into uselessness. He gripped the doorframe, chest tight, the familiar weight of failure pressing down. In his mind, every one of Noah's cries was proof he wasn't enough, that no matter what he did, he could never reach his son. Grace entered swiftly, her movements calm and decisive, as if the blackout hadn't caught her off guard. She struck a lighter, lit the first candle she found on the changing table. The warm glow softened the shadows in the room. Then she placed more candles around, moving with a confidence that contrasted sharply with Ethan's paralysis. When the dim light returned, she stepped to the crib and lifted Noah without hesitation. She held him close, rocking gently, her voice rising in the familiar lullaby. The same melody she had sung on quiet nights now filled the room, but this time with more strength and certainty. Noah's cries shifted into sobs, then soft whimpers, his body gradually relaxing in her arms. Ethan stood nearby, fists clenched at his sides. He hated how natural she looked, hated how easily she did what he could not, yet at the same time a wave of relief swept over him. He saw Noah calm in Grace's arms, something that had seemed impossible only moments earlier. The guilt weighed heavier, but alongside it came admiration, an acknowledgement that he wasn't in control. She was. Ethan stepped closer, his voice trembling as he finally spoke. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, almost whispering, though the storm outside drowned out nothing. Grace didn't turn, still rocking Noah. The lullaby didn't falter. Ethan collapsed into the chair by the crib, his eyes fixed on his son. "I keep failing him," he said, his throat tight. "Every time he needs me, I freeze. I don't know how to help. I don't know how to be the man he needs me to be." He paused, pressing a hand to his forehead, chest heaving. For too long, he had hidden behind anger, demands, and firing others. But now, with thunder shaking the house and candles flickering, all defenses were stripped away. His voice broke as he finally spoke the words buried deep. "I'm afraid I'll never be enough for him." Speaking it for the first time left him trembling. Grace turned slightly, still cradling Noah. She looked at Ethan with calm eyes, but said nothing. Instead, she sat down at the edge of the chair beside him, placing Noah between them. The boy's breathing had steadied, his face resting against her shoulder, soothed by the lullaby. Grace slowly reached out her free hand, as if offering Ethan the chance to refuse. He didn't. He let her take his hand, a grip firm yet warm. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes, ashamed yet relieved. He had never allowed anyone to see him this fragile, this broken. But Grace didn't judge. She didn't call him wrong or weak. She simply held his hand, steady and silent, letting the quiet carry more weight than words ever could. In that moment, Ethan felt a knot inside him loosen. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to show weakness without shame. The storm still roared outside, but inside the nursery, the air had changed. Noah was calm now, body relaxed, tiny hands no longer trembling. Candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan's hand remained in Grace's, and though no words passed between them, the silence was different. It was no longer the heavy silence of grief or guilt that had hung over the house for so long, but the silence of understanding, a space where he could breathe. He felt that Grace wasn't carrying his burden for him, but sharing it, reminding him he wasn't alone in this fight. For months, Ethan had pushed everyone away, convinced no one understood his pain or his son's needs. Yet here was Grace, showing him that fear didn't have to destroy him. He felt small but not powerless, vulnerable but not abandoned. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe being enough didn't mean never failing. It meant never giving up. As the storm outside calmed, the room settled into quiet. Noah slept soundly, his breath soft against Grace's shoulder. She gently laid him back in the crib, pulled up the blanket, then returned to her seat. Ethan still sat there, his hand entwined with hers. He didn't say thank you, didn't try to explain. There was no need. Grace remained silent too, understanding that words would shatter the fragile honesty of the moment. In that silence, Ethan felt something he hadn't dared to in so long, relief at no longer having to pretend. The blackout had revealed more than the absence of light. It had forced him to face the truths he had buried, his fear, his limits, and his need for help. And though he had just admitted his weakness, he felt no shame. With Grace's steady hand in his, he felt something new, something he thought he had lost forever. The courage to keep going, even in the dark. The next morning, the house felt wrapped in a soft haze, still quiet, but no longer cold. Ethan woke up later than usual. The emotions from the night before clung to him like fog. He couldn't remember the last time he cried. Maybe the night Anna died, or maybe long before that, back when he was a boy who didn't yet know how to hide everything behind silence. He passed by Noah's room. Inside, the boy was asleep, arms wrapped around a soft pillow, and a stuffed bear Ethan didn't recognize. Probably Grace's. Something pulled him down the hallway to a room he hadn't entered in 2 years. Anna's. Everything remained untouched, like a private museum of grief. Her scarf still draped over the chair. A notebook lay open halfway through, and on the vanity was a cream-colored envelope, edges slightly yellowed with time. Ethan picked it up. On the front, in her handwriting, "To Ethan, if I'm no longer here." His hands trembled as he opened it. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer with you and Noah. I don't know what the future holds, but there's something I fear more than death. It's the thought of you living on with your heart shut tight. Ethan, you're a good father, but I know you. I know you'll try to carry this alone. I know you'll believe no one else could possibly understand our son the way I did. And I know you'll keep everyone out. But Noah needs more than that. He needs someone willing to stay, and so do you. Someone will come, not to replace me, but to help you unlock a door you've kept sealed. Don't shut them out. Let yourself be loved again in a new way. I always believed that one day you wouldn't feel so alone, because the only thing I'm taking with me is that hope. Love always, Anna." Ethan folded the letter with trembling hands. He sat there for a long time. No tears, no movement, just breathing, heavy but lighter than anything he'd felt in 2 years. That night, when Grace sang to Noah as usual, Ethan didn't wait by the door. He opened it, walked into the room. He said nothing. But Grace saw, and for the first time they looked at each other not as employer and employee, but as two people carrying quiet grief, learning how to heal together. Grace had planned to leave that weekend. No one told her to. It was just a feeling, like a door she had quietly entered was now gently closing. Noah had made progress. Ethan? She wasn't sure. He spoke little, revealed even less. But something in her told her she was nearing the edge of where she belonged. She'd received an offer from a center for autistic children in another state. Steady work, decent pay, and above all, a place where she could continue doing what she believed in. That evening, after singing Noah to sleep, Grace was in the kitchen packing up quietly. She folded the dish towels one last time, aligned the spice jars, small rituals, like saying goodbye without words. Ethan entered, standing still for a moment. He looked around, a space that had once felt cold, now gently alive. "You're leaving?" he asked plainly. Grace looked up, unsurprised. She nodded. "Yes, I think I've done what I could. Noah, he's better." Ethan's hands tightened at his sides. His throat felt dry. "Don't go," he said, soft but certain. Grace stared at him, unsure. "I'm not saying this as your employer," Ethan continued. "I'm saying it as a father, as a man who's afraid of losing the one good thing he's just begun to get back." Grace stood frozen. Ethan took a breath. "I've lived in the dark too long. Since Anna died, I shut the world out. But you didn't knock. You just sat. You waited. You sang. You loved without asking for anything back. I don't know what's ahead. I can't promise much. But I know Noah needs you, and I do too." Grace still didn't answer. In her eyes was hesitation, not because she didn't want to stay, but because she wasn't sure something this good could be real. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm used to leaving before things fall apart." Ethan stepped closer, his voice a breath. "Nothing's falling apart here, Grace. Maybe for the first time, we're learning how to build again." A long pause. Then Grace smiled, tired but relieved. She nodded, and for the first time, she embraced Ethan. Not because she needed shelter, but because she'd found a place to rest. In a house once filled with silence, two broken souls were learning how to stand together. That morning, the sky was unusually clear after weeks of cold rain. Grace was in the backyard, replanting clusters of lavender along the wooden fence. Ethan sat nearby on a bench, a cup of hot coffee in his hand. A few meters away, Noah was playing, pushing a toy car around the bushes. He wasn't looking at anyone, but he wasn't hiding either. The fact that he was even willing to be outside was already a miracle. Ethan watched his son, his gaze tender yet hesitant. He still wasn't used to the change. It felt too fragile, as if the smallest misstep could shatter everything again. Grace, as always, remained quiet, patient, never forcing anything. "He likes the wind," Grace said softly, her eyes never leaving Noah. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, Hannah did too. She used to say the wind made everything easier to breathe." A moment of silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. Then it happened. Noah's toy car hit a small stone, tipping slightly to the side, and a tiny bug suddenly crawled out from under the wheel. The creature scurried forward, bumping into Noah's leg. The boy, startled, stepped back, and then, unexpectedly, laughed. A short laugh, light and quick, like a breeze. Ethan's head snapped up immediately. Grace turned too, as if she couldn't believe her ears. And then Noah laughed again, this time louder. He watched the little bug climbing onto a leaf, his small hands patting his thighs as if to share his delight. Grace set her gardening tools aside, tears spilling down her cheeks, even as her smile grew. Ethan moved closer, kneeling beside his son, his eyes wet. "Noah?" he called, his voice trembling. The boy didn't answer, but he kept laughing. And in that moment, without language, without explanation, Ethan knew. They had truly reached him, not through therapy, not through strict structure, but through love, patience, and a quiet faith that had endured for 2 years, that one day his laughter would return. And now, here it was, gentle, warm, and so genuine that it felt as though the whole world had stopped just to listen. 3 years passed. The house that was once silent was now filled with the sound of little footsteps, laughter echoing here and there, and the music from the Bluetooth speaker that Grace played every morning. Noah had grown, no longer the boy withdrawn into the shadows. He studied at a special school nearby, with teachers who understood him and a flexible schedule that gave him a sense of safety. Every afternoon he came home and hugged Grace as if it were a ritual he couldn't live without. Ethan was different too, more than ever. He was still a CEO, still busy, but now he had learned how to be present, truly present, in each moment with his son and the woman who had changed everything. And today was Grace's day. After years of waiting, she had finally completed her special training program in education for children with autism, a dream she once thought she would never get the chance to fulfill. The graduation ceremony was held in a small, cozy hall. Ethan and Noah sat in the front row. Noah wore a white shirt, holding a small bouquet of flowers that Ethan had helped him choose that morning. He didn't say a word, as usual, but his eyes followed Grace's every step as she walked up to the stage to receive her certificate. When her name was called, the hall erupted in applause. Ethan stood up, unable to hide his pride. But what surprised him wasn't his own emotion. It was Noah. The boy tugged lightly at Ethan's sleeve, raised the bouquet high, and then slowly walked toward the stage, hesitant yet determined. Grace looked down and saw Noah coming toward her, her heart stopping in her chest. Ethan didn't dare breathe. Noah stopped in front of her, wide-eyed, his breath uneven. And then, so softly, he spoke, "Mommy." The entire hall fell silent. Grace burst into tears, dropping to her knees as she embraced Noah. Ethan raised a hand to his mouth, but the sob broke free, loud, raw, and liberating, as if years of grief had finally found release in one sacred word. Years of waiting, years of effort, now rewarded by a single word. More sacred than anything he had ever heard in his life. Not Miss Grace, not the caregiver, but Mommy. That word was not just for Grace. It was for everyone who had stayed, who had loved, who had refused to leave when things grew hard. That day was not only the day Grace graduated, it was the day their family was recognized.